Okay, so my name is Madeline Dyer and I am a dystopian writer. I've got a complete series out now called the Untamed series. This is book one here. It's all dystopian fiction, but there are elements of fantasy in these books too. And today, there's book two. Today I'll be talking about how I go about building a believable dystopian world. Because as a writer of dystopian fiction, I often get asked this question, like, how do you create a dystopian society, or how do you make such a world seem believable? And those are excellent questions. So a lot of work does go into the crafting a believable dystopian world. And before I even begin writing the first chapter, I spend days researching and jotting down ideas. And it's often the case that only after I've spent a few weeks, a few weeks at least, mulling over these possible ideas for a basis of my dystopian world, and during that time, I've really delved into all the minute details of it, that I realised whether it's viable or not to set a story in that world. Because there's nothing worse than a great plot being let down by holes and contradictions in the world building if you've created a world that doesn't support the type of story that you're trying to tell. So, firstly, by definition, a dystopia is a frightening society. Most commonly, a dystopia reveals how a societal system that was originally intended to improve people's lives has actually created oppressive circumstances. So dystopian fiction usually has a dark, gritty tone and a strong social message, where the dystopian world acts as a warning of what could happen in real life. Of course, it's unlikely to happen, but the possibility must always be there. The reader must be able to see these links to the real world. And one of the most important things about a dystopia is how it interacts with the real world. And that means your dystopian world that you're creating must be absolutely believable and be portrayed as realistically as possible. So to craft a dystopian world, you need to know everything about your world. And by everything, I really do mean everything. So you need to be constantly asking yourself questions, because you need to know all the answers, even if not everything that you know does actually make it into the final book or the series. You still need to know it as the author. So you need to know, how did this world emerge? What is the society like? What are the rules and the laws? How is the law enforced? How do people live? How are these people divided? Because usually you will end up with a very strict division in these dystopian societies. And you need to also ask these questions sort of on a character level as well. So how do your characters feel about the system that they live in? And how do other people feel? What currently stops them from rebelling? Has anyone rebelled? Is there like a history of rebellion? What are the consequences of people fighting back? So basically, you're creating a whole new story. And if you think about the society that we live in now and how everything operates here, how things are run, how we behave, what the norms are, and what the problems are, you just need to think of it in terms that all these things that you know about today's society, you also need to know about your dystopian world, and more as well. So you need to make sure that you know the answers to any questions about your world, and that your readers will also know the answers to any questions that are relevant to the story. So you do need to supply enough background information, because you don't want to give it all at the start of the book, but you do need to sort of feed it in, because there's nothing worse than just throwing a reader into so much action and a world, but not telling them how it was created. So in sort of when I'm crafting a dystopia, I will sort of like divide it into several sections. So the first section for me is always what I think of as the foundations of the world. And because many dystopian novels call for change and incorporate a strong social message, dystopian societies explore the consequences of what happens when things are run differently, or when one thing is favoured over another. So building your dystopian world on the basis of an existing issue, one that has the potential to become a huge issue, like much more than it is now, will immediately make your dystopian world more believable. So problems and issues that are typically explored in dystopian fiction include politics and governments, the economy, poverty, loss, climate change, the true nature of man, technology, and scientific advances. And it was the scientific advances that really inspired my series. So I wonder if I can show you all four books. No, I can't hold all four at the same time. So yeah, those are the first two. And here we go. There's book three. Oh, and book 4. So yeah, my 4 books are all about sort of this world where everything's gone wrong because people have strived to do like scientific advances, and it's at the extent of humanity. So going back to that list of issues that I just gave of the sort of things that dystopian fiction often does look at, a good way to create a dystopian world is to take one of these issues like poverty, loss, climate change, and exaggerate it beyond all current proportions. And you've really got to concentrate on showing the oppressing side effects of such an issue when it is exaggerated to such an extent. Because you're creating a dystopia, your society must feel frightening, and it must be a place where we don't want to live. It has to make the readers feel fear. So there must be this imminent threat of loss throughout, and a strong sense of danger that accompanies the magnification of the issue explored. So to use the Hunger Games as an example, Suzanne Collins exaggerates the rich-poor divide, as well as exploring how far people will go in the name of entertainment, depicting the suffering and violence this causes. Veronica Roth's Divergent trilogy explores the notions of divisions, experimentation, and control, as well as how far people will go for power, thereby emphasizing the risks of dehumanization. So once you've decided which theme and issue your world is going to explore, you'll need to focus on how the exaggeration of this issue or problem is going to cause damage to your society. Will it oppress men? Will it have dehumanizing effects? Will it result in violence? Or will it be the solution to this problem that actually damages society more? Perhaps the only way to keep this problem under control is through a method that causes a loss of free will, imprisonment, and the degeneration of man. But without this solution, would the exaggerated problem that you're writing about have got worse, causing even more oppression? So if you do include a solution for a problem, then you need to know everything about the solution and how society has been fixed by it. Well, fixed in inverted commas, because obviously it's not actually been fixed. So you need to work out why this thing that they did that they thought was a solution would have initially have been chosen, and you need to know how it's gone so wrong. How long did it take for it to go wrong? And was there any initial distrust of this solution? Or were the bad effects of it only realised much later? So you need to think about what is at stake, what will happen or be lost if nothing is currently done. What are the consequences, both for past actions and developments and potential new actions that are a direct result of this solution that's gone wrong? Because people are going to be doing something that's sort of going to be what is motivating your characters, because they will be reacting against the oppression. So you need to look at why it is apparently so difficult for your characters to fix it, because it must be difficult. You can't make it really easy for your characters, because the whole story is about them trying to sort of rise up and stop this bad world. So who is trying to stop your characters from disobeying their new social system or trying to change it? That's one big thing to think about, because that will lead in directly to the work that you'll then do on building your antagonist and all this sort of people and things that will stop your protagonist. So another way of creating a dystopian premise is to toy with the idea of taking something away, something that is essential in our everyday life, and seeing how this changes a society and the complications and consequences that arise from this. Or how about exploring what would happen if something was added, like something completely unexpected, something that sends the world into chaos when new systems and strategies have to be introduced almost overnight. And this is the case with Rick Yancey's The Fifth Wave. Like that trilogy deals with an alien invasion and how that affects the human population, changing their society and values. So yeah, young adult dystopian fiction is big at the moment, and so many worlds have already been created with so many problems supposedly fixed. Of course, it's unlikely that you're going to come up with a completely new idea, because haven't all storylines already been done? But the execution of your idea is where you can really shine, and that's where you can be unique. And even if two writers are writing exactly the same premise, the stories are going to end up completely different, because you have different characters, different motivations of your characters, different personalities within your characters. The world building won't be exactly the same, and crafting a believable dystopian world does come into this. And remember, even if everything that you plan out doesn't actually go into your book, if you write your manuscript knowing everything, the world will immediately be more believable to readers. And perhaps more importantly, you need to know exactly why this new solution has made your world so frightening. and you need to know sort of everything about it. So, and do remember that the crucial thing is how your dystopian world interacts with the current world. So if readers can notice how small parts of your world tie into the society that they live in now, immediately this link helps to make your world more believable that you're creating. So that's really sort of what I call the foundations of building a dystopian society. And the second area that I always look at is, well, it's very much linked to this because it's about knowing the history of this world, the world that you're creating. So knowing how your dystopian world operates is only one step of the process of crafting a believable world, like knowing how it operates in the time of your story. In order to make this world as believable as possible to readers, you need to be able to really show how this dystopia evolved. And we have touched on this a bit before earlier in this video, but history plays a vital role in our society, like present day, current day. Everything is sort of linked back to history because we do learn from things that have happened. We don't want to start wars again. Well, we should be learning from things that have happened. And history will play a vital role in your dystopian society too. And the more details you can give about every aspect of your world, the better and more believable it will be. So the questions that I like to ask myself for this sort of second stage of creating a dystopian world is, how exactly did things get into the state that they are in now? Was it a slow process or a quick one? Was there opposition? If there was, how was that sorted? Are there still consequences from previous oppositions happening now? And can any of the people in your story remember the old world, the world that's more similar to the world that like your readers will live in? Or did this sort of dystopian environment happen like 50 years ago or 300 years ago? So how stable is your dystopian world? And a good thing to also think about is whether you're going to set it in like current places and using sort of country names. So if country names and boundaries have changed in sort of your new world, with like land being divided up in different ways, you need to know when this happened. When do places get renamed? Is the history of a society taught to people in your dystopian world? So at school, is there something that they're taught on, or are they taught much more about sort of our history, so to speak? And is that past state of society used as a threat against them, sort of as a warning about this will happen again if you don't follow these rules? So those are just some of the questions you need to ask yourself, and the more detail you can put it in about the transition from the present day world to your dystopian world, the more believable your world will be. So this brings us to the next section, like the third section of crafting a believable dystopian world, and this is very much about the system and the people. So now that you've created your dystopian society and you know exactly why this world is a frightening place and how it evolved like that, you need to work out the details of how the society runs. We need to know everything, as I've said before. So why has no one instigated change before? What's stopping them? Who is in charge? What type of government is in place? Who is in power? Who is oppressed? Can these people see that they're being oppressed? That's quite a big one. Or can they sit in some areas and not others? Do they think that this world is like really beneficial for them, but really they're just helping to sort of keep a divide in place? And think about what will happen if nothing changes. So, because dystopian worlds are very much about sort of this need for change, and that's where the novels come in, because the novels follow this change and look at the characters that bring about this change. But you also need to think about what will happen if nothing does change with the way things are run. Will people just become more oppressed? Will other people just become more powerful? Will you get more danger overall? And then think about how laws and rules are enforced. So what punishments are used? Because these punishments will typically play a big role in your plot, because you will usually have your main character going against the system and either being punished for it or risking punishment. So you can always have this threat of punishments sort of hanging over the main character, and that creates a lot of tension. And how are criminals dealt with? Who is viewed as a criminal? So other questions to think about include, how similar is the society to ours? How different is it? What is the economy like? Is it fair and equal to everyone? Who is privileged? Is there a healthcare system? Does everyone have access to this healthcare system? What about education? What is taught in schools? Like we've already touched on that a bit with the history part of this. So is history taught in schools? but what other subjects are taught? Like, how similar is it to today's society, basically? And an important thing to consider here is gender relations. Which genders are more privileged than others? So you can always think about how your new dystopian world that you're creating relates to sort of gender politics as well, and representations of gender. So another part of this sort of the system and the people part of creating a believable dystopian world is understanding exactly how your characters interact with this world that they live in. You know how the society was created, you know which people live there, but how do they live? Are they in cities, rural areas? What do they wear? What is their culture? How do they name people and things? And what types of technology do they use? Or is technology feared? What are their rituals and beliefs? And which religions are the most dominant and why? You'll also need to think about equality sort of whenever you're creating a society of people, because equality is usually nearly always a big issue in dystopian fiction, because that's sort of like one of the sort of main things of the genre, really. So think about the class systems, who is discriminated against, how different are the characters' attitudes to given things and to your own attitudes to them or for readers. What's the dominant ideology in this world? And ethics, like how many hours is one expected to work each week? What will happen if they refuse to? How can an individual aspire to get more power and status? How do different people react to the oppression? So remember, if someone's grown up in a culture so different to the one that you as the author have grown up in, is that person really going to be able to see their own culture and its flaws in the same light that we see it as outsiders? Because like when we're growing up, we have a very sort of tainted view of our world because we're so involved in it. And you need to understand that characters are going to have that same tainted view. But to readers who have not grown up in that world, it's going to be more apparent to them about the flaws. So yeah, this point is particularly useful to keep in mind if you're writing in first person. But this isn't to say that your main character won't see that there's anything wrong with the world at all, because they will. You just need to decide what the catalyst is that makes them suddenly realize and that there is something hugely wrong, and what the catalyst is that makes them decide to try and bring about change. So you will have tension and conflict from those two things. And tension and conflict are both vital to any plot, and it's the characters and motivations and goals that they set themselves that should drive the plot. So the next section that I always go to when crafting a believable dystopian world is like the little details. So there are still many, many little details left to iron out. And quite frankly, you're not going to get them all sorted quickly, like if at all. I know I don't. It's often just when I'm sort of like writing and editing and I've got sort of a solid draft that I then find these little details that I need to sort of iron out. But you do need to account for as many of these details as possible so that your readers aren't being drawn away from the plot to ask questions about the world that they're being asked to temporarily live in. So you'll need to know how food is produced in this dystopian world. Like, is there still farming, or is it all genetically engineered? What sort of the normal way that food is divided between people? How much food is available? And what about water, pollution, contamination? What is the climate of the world like? Why is it like that? So again, there's just like lots of different questions that you can ask yourself, and asking yourself questions is a great way to really make you think about the world. So yeah, you've got to sort of like think about how all these different things will affect the people who live there, especially the climate of the world and sort of the way that people are divided. So do they inhabit all areas of the world? Which plants are able to grow in the environment? Which animals are present? And at this stage, I do find creating a map can be quite helpful. And as you can see, once you really get exploring your dystopian world, more and more questions will crop up. And by no means are the questions I've mentioned so far the only questions you should consider. But it's only through delving into your world and exploring it throughout that you can really begin to get to know it and learn exactly how your dystopian world operates. But your dystopian world must feel real to you. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. It's just so crucial. And only once you know absolutely everything that you can know, that will your world begin to seem real to you. Like, if it doesn't seem real to you, chances are it's not going to seem real or believable to your readers. And believability is something that you definitely want. Like, there's no fun reading a book where the characters seem unintentionally confused by the world they've been placed in, or where the author regularly gives contradictions regarding the rules of the world and how it came to be, or where there are so many holes in the creation of the world that readers notice them more than the actual world's rules, or where just not enough information is given, because you need to ground your reader enough so that they feel sort of on the same page as the main character. So, given how successful dystopian fiction is in the young adult market today, and the adult market too now, you need to make sure that you don't give your readers any sort of reason to stop reading your book, because you don't want them picking up another one. And I do like to think of the world and setting as sort of the foundations for a plot, because in dystopian fiction, if you've not crafted a strong, believable world, then it doesn't really matter how strong your characterization is or how excellent your plot is. There will be cracks across the whole book. And with how in dystopian fiction it's usually an incident of unjust societal oppression that spurs the main character to instigate change, the world you've built will be directly linked to characters' motivations and the plot. And I do find that when I'm creating a world and really sort of like investigating it all and sort of like getting to know it, that's when I also get like a plot sort of forming simultaneously, and also the characters too. So for me, I sort of build up these three areas, like the setting, the plot, and the characters at the same sort of time. So yeah, planning your dystopian world is important, particularly when world building is a huge part of dystopian fiction. And as I've said, to achieve a sense of realism in your dystopian world, you will need to know everything about the world, including its rules. And for this reason, I find it very hard to write a dystopian novel without doing a lot of planning beforehand. If I'm going to place characters in a new world, I need to know everything. And often when I'm writing the first draft, even after carrying out countless amounts of research and spending hours plotting like the world, I will just say I don't tend to plot the actual plot and what the characters will do. The only sort of planning that I really do is planning the world, because for me, if I'm writing a book, I need to sort of be discovering what is happening as I go. Because if I plan it all like chapter by chapter before I write it, I feel like I've already written it and then I'm just not sort of motivated to continue writing it. So when I talk about planning, I'm very specifically meaning planning sort of the world building rather than planning the actual plot and what the book is going to be about, although the two things do merge, of course. So yeah, often when writing the first draft, like even though I have spent a long time planning it out, I won't convey my dystopian world in the most believable way that I could. And that's just something you have to acknowledge, because the first draft is not going to be perfect. There will still be holes in it, and you'll have to go through it time and time again. And that is mainly like what I found revisions and editing are for. Like, particularly, it's about strengthening world building for me. So before I started writing my first YA dystopian novel, which is Untamed, which here it is, there we go. Yeah, I was sure that I'd understood the world that I created, but it was only after I finished the second draft and explored all the characters' motivations in detail and how they were reacting against this unfair world did I realise that I only thought I knew my world well, and it turned out I didn't. Like, not really. There were lots of holes, a few minor contradictions, as well as things that didn't make sense, especially regarding the history of my world and timelines. And although I knew that there were aspects of my world that weren't working, I couldn't necessarily work out exactly what it was that needed fixing. So I was just too close to the manuscript to see them. And it was only after a break and getting feedback from several other writers and my critique partners that I was able to see the areas of my dystopian world that needed more clarification and definition. And a great way to make sure that you've covered all the questions and aspects involved in crafting a believable world is to talk to someone else about the world that you're creating. And ideally, this should be a person who doesn't know a thing about your plans for this world or the book that you're writing, and explain everything to this person. Like, I'd suggest it is a close friend or a fellow writer, family member perhaps, and don't sort of like tell them about the plot, just stick to the world building and let them ask questions. Often when there are holes in the world that we've created, like, we as the author, we're just we're too close to see the holes. So having a fresh set of eyes to look at a new society that you're creating can be really beneficial, especially when they can point out a whole new side of things that you might have overlooked. And you should encourage them to ask questions, ask what they want to know more about, things that you might not yet have covered. And of course, the answers to all the questions I've been talking about to ask yourself in regards to crafting this believable world should tie together and make logical sense. The dystopian world you create will be more believable to readers if it works as a whole rather than as individual fragments. And it should be logical. Like, you're asking readers to suspend belief, to sort of like see themselves in this dystopian world, but you don't want to make that really hard for them to do. So it has got to be sort of making logical sense. And it's very likely, as I said earlier, that the majority of details that you know about your world, like the sort of like background and little details, may not even come into your manuscript at all. Particularly if it's a series, you might find book one sort of concentrates on one aspect of the world. And that's definitely what I did with my series. So book one is very much about sort of the current state of the world and the change that needs to be brought about. And it's sort of the beginning of that change happening. Then book two looks more at sort of the mythologies and sort of religious beliefs that some of the people in this world have and how they are reacting to the change. Then book three is very much more about the oppressive sort of part of society and how that came to be. So then it's building up a picture, and then by book four in my series, you then got like it all comes together and you've got the global view of the whole world. And it is all the same main character narrating it throughout. So I do think that it comes together nicely, and because I sort of open up a new layer of the world building with each book, it does sort of bring a lot of new things to the world building while still building on the foundations I've already laid. So yeah, because you need to know absolutely everything before, well, I'd say ideally before starting at least a second draft. If you know everything, that way when you're writing, you're likely to subconsciously slip in details that reinforce sort of different ideas, as well as suggesting and reinforcing the motives of characters. Because that information has come naturally to you and because you know it. If you have to stop and think about every little detail you want to put in as you're writing, the chances are your pace will become jilted and you'll lose the momentum that you've built up, as well as bringing in quite a few contradictions. And like, you don't want to be sort of having to stop writing and sort of like lose your place in the story every time when you need to add in a new detail. So I think that's why it's really important to sort of craft this world before you start like the bulk of the writing. And another thing to remember is the art of creating not only a believable world but an engaging storyline is all about how you deliver the rules of the new world to your reader. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but as soon as possible, your readers need to know the rules of the world, but you don't want to sort of dump a load of information on them in chapter one. Like, you need your writing to be engaging, and you need to write the opening of your novel as if a reader already knows, but because the characters most certainly do know this world that they live in. But as you do this, you need to feed in little snippets of explanations, like as soon as possible, really. Ideally starting in the first chapter, and particularly by sort of like chapter 4 or 5, readers should have like a solid sense of this world. And by this, well, I'd say sort of by middle of chapter 2 or 3, your reader does need to know the two most important things about your dystopian world, which is why the society or system is a threat in its existing state, and why nothing so far has successfully been done about it. Because this is a way to bring in sort of like the tension and foreshadowing, and if nothing has been done successfully so far about it, because people keep getting killed if they try and sort of like stand up for it, or if they get imprisoned, then you've immediately got this threat of the reader knowing, oh, this is the risk, and you want to make the stakes high. So a great way to explore how other writers introduce new worlds in an engaging manner is to read as much as you can. Never underestimate the benefits of reading other dystopian novels. Take a look at how authors craft their works, craft their worlds in this genre, and which ones feel more believable to you as a reader. And then once you've finished reading them, I'd suggest read them again, but be analytical. Like, work out why these worlds feel believable to you. Examine what these authors do. And I'd also suggest reading outside the dystopian genre as well. A lot of speculative fiction novels, fantasy and science fiction especially, are set in new worlds. learn what you can from them. See what you like, what works for you as a reader. See if there are any books where you've suddenly got like a lot of world building and you just start to gloss over paragraphs. Think about why you're doing that. Is there too much information being given at once? Is it just too heavy? Are you looking for sort of more action at this point? And then at the parts where they are explaining the world and you feel really engaged about it, think about why. Is it because some action has already happened and you're taking a sort of like little breather from the action and you've now got like this space where you can rest and absorb the new details of the world? So really learn what you can from other books and have fun exploring the world that you're crafting when you're writing as well. So to sum up, I'd say remember the believability of your dystopian world essentially boils down to knowing your world. I mean, it's quite obvious, really, because if it's real to you, then it's going to be more believable to anyone else. And if you don't believe in it, how do you expect your readers to? So I think those are sort of like the important things to remember. And don't put too much pressure on yourself either, because books go through countless drafts and rewrites, and you're not going to get it perfect first time. But you do need to be aware of the world building and yeah, just have fun really. So yeah, those are sort of my ideas about crafting a believable dystopian world, and that's how I do it.